Hello folks, I'm Rob. This is my State of the Dungeon address for July 11th, 2019. The game, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. The campaign, Prince of the Apocalypse. All players attending. Last time we had played, the group had witnessed Ol Hydra coming through the plane from elemental water. And that was a bit of a hitch in their stride, but they collaborated with some of the heroes of their world to try to defend it against imminent destruction from the princess of elemental water. Primarily, the point man for this was Mordenkainen, as he has been for so many other threats in the world. And Mordenkainen basically briefed them on the scenario. So the progress that they took forward was going to be to cut off the other elemental portals that were still leaking power and that Ol Hydra would be able to take advantage of. Now, they only had one elemental weapon yet. They had Tinder Strike, which they would be able to close the fire portal with. So they were sent off. Mordenkainen gave them the advantage of teleporting them above the particular temple to Scarlet Moon Hall, where they had first cleared out the druid Elisar Dryflask and his cult. And later they had used a transit through Besselmer to get to the Elemental Temple of Fire and take out Vanifer, the Prophet. That's how they got Tinder Strike. So, they had never really gone down from Scarlet Moon Hall. So the group teleported there, and also Mordenkainen made them invisible with a group invisibility spell. So they were invisible as long as they didn't attack anything. So when they appeared in Scarlet Moon Hall, they needed to go down. So there was a door that was warded by the druidess, who had basically taken charge of making sure the fire cult stayed routed. And Oric was up to the task. His skills were certainly enough for the lock, and then he was, well, let's just say using mithril lockpicks and being really nimble is a good defense against the kind of ward that she put on. Caused the lock to superheat. Would have damaged him, but he made his roll, so he was fine. They opened the door. There were magmen. How are they going to get by the magmen without engaging combat and breaking their visibility? Well, the magmen were kind of starved for fun. Their basically thought processes are like small destructive children who just want to burn things. So they threw them down wood away from the trapdoor leading down, which was made of stone they couldn't burn. So they threw in enough wood so the magmen could continue their little bonfire, and they slipped down, opened up the trapdoor, got down. So they started going through the outskirts of the Elemental Temple of Fire. The Temple of the Eternal Flame. And they noticed that clearly the water cult had been through here already. They got to one of the first rooms, and there were a couple flame racks. These are human warriors who've had their heart removed and flame inserted. They're constantly in pain, but they're still alive, although their souls have pretty much been sacrificed to Imix, the Prince of Fire. In essence, these guys were chained up between a couple of pillars, and they were covered with symbols of Ol Hydra, demonstrating that. So as the party stuck between them, a trap was triggered, and both of them detonated. They detonate with fireball-like explosions when they die. So they did that. It would have probably done significant damage to a lesser group. Half of the group is resistant to fire, and the other half can pretty much dodge just about anything. So the group took only some minor damage from that. From that, Oric, who had been in this temple before, looked around and realized that they were pretty close to the foundry, where they had rescued some Azers, fiery dwarves from the elemental chaos, and realized that they could, from there, go down to the fire node, they hoped. So they took the shortest route, avoiding the remaining guardians who were still there, and got to the fire foundry, which is not active anymore. They took the cylindrical elevator, basically, to the Fane of the Eye, the intermediary parts that all of the nodes connect from. They found out why it's called the Fane of the Eye fairly soon. They crept along, avoiding the fiery minotaurs who dwell in the Fane of the Eye on the fire area, noticing that there's water flooding into this fane. It's getting to be distracting. The fire creatures aren't real thrilled with it, but they seem to be forced to stay there. So they slipped around the minotaurs and found themselves in a drow crypt. Big sarcophagus there. Out of character, they didn't decide to vandalize it or break into it or anything. They went to the next room, and they found the Temple of the Eye, altar. It's a big ziggurat, basically, very Aztec style, with channels for blood sacrifices. And in a flash of insight, they realized that this was the Temple of the Elder Elemental Eye, a cult that pre-existed the princes of the elemental chaos. They were in one of the few places in the world that Old Hydro probably was never going to chase them into, because she stole power from the evil elemental eye, and part of how she got to be so powerful, so she wasn't likely to go back in there. So there was a sacrifice that they forgot about. Just a commoner, probably. Nobody of any significance. But he was left at the altar, and they slipped out because they're still invisible. Eventually, they find the hole, the portal, that allows them to go down. And so they go down. And find themselves overlooking a huge domed room with a lake of lava below. Directly underneath the hole is a platform of stone floating in the lava, and leading from it are stepping stones, requiring some hopping to get you from the central stone over to the easiest passage. They noted there were several exits out of the room, including a flow of lava coming in. So the party started thinking about how they were going to get down. Brock cast Fly. Lord Brock is the gnome wizard, illusionist primarily, and flew down. Even though he was invisible, he got racked. A nasty kind of creature called a flame urge could tell that there was a cold spot up there, which, comparatively to the rest of the room, living creatures are actually cold to them. So it attacked him right off the bat, and with a couple of spells, rocked him hard. Really hard, like just about dead. And because he was flying, he had a spell that required concentration. Well, that slipped. Now, below him was nothing but lava. This was going to be ugly and quick. So the rest of the group leapt to his defense. The paladin Antaeus used Misty Step to appear right next to the falling wizard and caught him. Can't exactly remember how he was going. Oh, yes, that's right. He has a helm which can turn him into a swan, and he was going to try to fly them down. But thinking quickly, the monk, Oriana, dropped down, and she used her water whip to lash Antaeus. Not having to lash Brock means that she wouldn't do damage to Brock and risk, knocking him out or killing him. So she lashed on Antaeus and pulled natural 20, automatically did half damage to him as she reeled him in. So that was probably appreciated. She saved both of them, because Antaeus used a spell and he was not able to actually stop their fall. They would have both plunged into the lava. Antaeus might have been able to hold him up while he sank into the lava, but fortunately we didn't have to worry about that. However, there was still a hostile who was firing at them, firing powerful fiery bolts. Nasty little creature that I cooked up called a flame urge. Well, they were trying to spar with it, but not very well. There wasn't a clear path to them, and now none of them could fly. So while they did engage a little missile fire, which it was concealed in a darkened entrance that they couldn't get to, they were firing with disadvantage, which anybody who's played 5th edition can tell you is irritating. Rolling 2 dice and taking the worst, it can be really hard. So the party started jumping across the stepping stones. Auric, of course, being the rogue that he is amazingly deft and skipped over there, found out that, well, something was coming. He could hear it, and pretty soon he could see it was a huge fire giant that was lumbering along, checking in on the sounds of ruckus. Well, he was still invisible, so he pulled out Rack, his sword that works well against the living, and he waited for it to pass by, and he tried to hamstring it. Fire giants are really, really tall. Dwarven rogues are not so tall. He did some damage, impressively, but did not hamstring the creature. So his invisibility shattered, and the giant realized, oh, something is attacking me, and it kind of hurt a little. I'd better stomp this. Oriana skips across. No problem. The flame urge is out of range of her water whip. Her options are pretty much limited, so she skipped around, no problem. Antaeus stood and tried to defend Brock, which was noble, because Brock was still in horrible shape. They tried to heal him mostly by giving him the party's healing potions, which he started sucking down like mad, just trying to keep up as he was still being attacked from attacks from the flame urge, and, you know, assorted other difficulties that they were having. And while Geth came down and started firing back at the flame urge, again, disadvantage, it's tough to get through. They were having some real difficulties with this fight. Eventually, Oriana saw that Auric was having a fight with a fire giant, but realizing that the rest of the group was having some real problems with this flame urge, she ran around, and her speed as a monk, yeah, she was able to get over and start menacing that flame urge before he could continue to attack the rest of the group, trying to free everybody else up so that they could go and help Auric, which was pretty noble of her. Donlud came over, the warlock, and he started engaging with the fire giant after firing a few parting bolts at the flame urge, and it looked like things were going, you know, pretty well. Although the group was taking some heavy damage from the flame urge, Auric was dancing around the fire giant, and he was not hitting him at all. Funnily enough, the dwarves lost their defensive bonus against giants, but I was rolling poorly, and Auric was taking advantage of it. The fire giant finally hit Auric, and Auric turned around and rolled a natural 20, massive damage back, and just about took out that fire giant by himself in a single round's worth of damage. It was impressive. Of course, critical strikes, when you're rolling extra dice from sneak attack, all those dice are doubled as well. So he rolled a lot of dice and rolled really well. Antaeus saw that that fight was getting taken care of pretty well, so he ran over to support Oriana. And while Oriana started fighting the flame urge, it was a tough creature. By herself, she would have had a difficult time fighting it, but if it didn't hurt her too badly, she probably could have weathered it. When Antaeus came up, with the hurting that he can lay down with his divine attacks, yeah, it didn't last very long after that. When it died, a single ruby fell to the ground. Antaeus scooped it up, and they went back to go and check on the fire giant. By this time, the fire giant was done. With the rest of the group there, Auric did a lot of the heavy lifting, but they eventually chopped it down. When the group gathered back together, they found out that poking his head through was another one of those flame racks. Except he looked in and he took off. Donlud chased after him. He seemed to vanish. All they saw was an overarch that was passing over this river of lava that had flowed into the original lake, and didn't see any sign of the fire cultists. So they doubled back, and at that time, the ruby that Antaeus had gathered actually proved to be a delayed blast fireball. I loved those things from back in second edition is mostly when I use them. And the whole party had to make saving throws. I don't think it took anybody down, even as badly as Brock had been down. I think he has gone through so many of the party's healing potions that he was still just up on his feet. So while the group was getting themselves together, Oric had found out that there was a ledge overlooking the scene where they had been battling the fire giant, and he tried scaling up. Not too impressively, but he made it. Eventually, standing on the fire giant, the group got up and found out that the fire giant satchel was up there, which they claimed, some treasure, nice, and that there was a boulder blocking a secret passage out. They rolled the boulder out of the way, came into the secret passage. The room beyond was amazing. It was a round room that was completely set with skulls, all of them with a flame inside the mouths of different colors. So it set the whole room in a rainbow cascade of colors. Little disconcerting at first, but, you know, they managed. There was a chimney dropping down from this room into another that was brightly lit, and opposite this there was a bridge that was crossing the lava yet again. One of the group poked their head down the chimney, and when Antaeus went down, he started taking damage immediately. Inside the small chamber, there was a circular wall of fire that was holding 3 people inside who were not getting burned, but clearly didn't want to be there. 2 of them looked like a normal man and woman, human, but the third one was a dwarf, a rather young dwarf. A young dwarf with noble clothes underneath tattered remnants of pilgrim's clothes. Yes, this was the dwarven prince that they had originally been sent to, their first group had been originally sent into the valley to go and rescue, find out what had happened to them. Well, he's here. And the group tried to figure out how they're going to get past that circle of fire. They tried thinking of maybe getting the people up to the ceiling and flying out. That wasn't a good idea. That would have killed any of them easily enough. They argued and argued and argued and argued about how to do this. Eventually, they dropped down the dagger Tinder Strike. I don't know if they reasoned that the only way they could create a permanent effect for Vanifer was able to make a permanent effect like that was to use Tinder Strike, but they slashed at the wall with Tinder Strike and snuffed it out. So they had rescued these people. So the prince is grateful. The humans were grateful. They turned out their merchants that the fire cult had coveted. And that is where they are now, deep in the fire node. None of them are invisible. The stealth thing was only going to go so far. So they're not invisible anymore. They are looking for the path to go deeper into the node so that they can try to close the portal and deny Old Hydra a measure of power. Then they're going to have to figure out how they could possibly either slow Old Hydra's advance or try to get the Spear Wind Vein back that would help them to close the air portal, or an all-out assault on Old Hydra. We'll find out next time. Thanks for joining me, and yeah, from the Dungeon of Love, it's me signing off. Thank you and farewell.